Israel is becoming an increasingly religious country in which Orthodox Judaism is gaining an ever tighter hold and squeezing secular Israelis out of the picture. That's the claim. It's also a myth, according to my next guest, Shmuel Rosner, co-author of a revolutionary new study that says everything you thought you knew about religious and secular in Israel is wrong. Shmuel, welcome to the studio.
It's a pleasure.
First off, what are your surprising findings in this book?
Well, first of all, I must say that the book was co-authored by me and my distinguished colleague, Professor Camille Fuchs, who's Israel's leading pollster. We did a vast study of Israeli Jews, and what we found is that Israel is becoming actually more secular, not more religious, and it's developing its own unique culture, unique in the sense that it is unique to this place and to this time. It's a culture combining or amalgamating two trends towards tradition, not religion, tradition, and nationality. Namely, when you ask Jews in Israel, what is it to be a good Jew? They'll say, serving in the IDF is to be a good Jew. Living in Israel is to be a good Jew. When you ask them about practice, they'll tell you that they do many things that symbolize the Judaism. They light candles on Hanukkah. They sit to the Seder, vast majority of them.
And that's an interesting point, because when we talk about Israelis becoming more secular, that word secular in the Israeli context doesn't mean exactly what it means in the rest of the world. It's still quite traditional. But what is Israeli secularism?
Well, because Israel is a Jewish state and because the main society here is a Jewish society, many of the things that we consider to be quote-unquote religious are actually just tradition for Israelis. They breathe it as they wake up in the morning. They all go to have Friday night dinners with their families because this is what Israelis...
Whether or not they're making kiddush over a cup of wine or candles.
Almost 60% of them make kiddush, but this doesn't mean that they believe in God. It doesn't mean that they observe Shabbat in the Orthodox way. It means that they will make the kiddush on Friday night, and the next morning they might go to the beach or might go to do their shopping or might go elsewhere. They are committed to a tradition, not to halachic religion.
Okay, so secular is some sort of secular, traditional hybrid, but in what way is Israel becoming more secular? Are secular people suddenly having more babies than religious people, or are religious people leaving the fold?
Well, first of all, secular people in Israel do have children more than secular people anywhere else in the Western world. We know that the birth rate in Israel is very high. This is not only true for religious or ultra-orthodox people. This is true for secular Israelis as well. The second phenomenon is just what you mentioned. Many people who are born to religious families are becoming less religious with time. They are becoming traditional or even traditional secular, and sometimes even totally secular. So we see a move leftward, so to speak, from religiosity towards secularism. And again, it's a mixture of things that is much more interesting and unique than people tend to think.
And it's really that mixture that's interesting, because we're not talking about black and white, secular and religious. In this book that you've co-authored, you come up with a new theory of how Israeli society is actually divided into quite different tribes. Talk us through that.
Right. Instead of dividing Israelis between religious and non-religious, or religious, traditional and non-religious, we decided, we applied all kinds of statistical techniques to the data that we gathered, and we came up with what we think is the important map of Israeli Jewish society. It's a map in which you have these two poles, the tradition and nationality, and you see that most Israelis are what we call Jewish Israelis. They combine tradition with nationality, and then you have these three minority groups. We call them Israelis. These are people who do nationality but do not do tradition. They're
sort of secular in the traditional sense.
Secular in the traditional sense. These are about 15% of the Jewish population. Then you have about 17% whom we call Jewish, who do tradition but don't do as much nationality. Many Haredis, ultra-orthodox, fall into this category. And the smallest group is the group that we call universalist. Those are the only people, 13%. Those are the only people who aren't interested neither in tradition nor in Israeli nationality. It's a minority group.
Okay, Shmuel Rosner, co-author of Israeli Judaism, Portrait of a Cultural Revolution.